They're all trying to throw Trump under the bus now because they see that he can no longer do shit for them. And they're all trying to act as if he is the biggest problem in this world. He's not. They're all trying to act as if he is the reason why America is where it is today. And they're all trying to blame it on this one man. Trump is the fall guy for patriarchy and capitalism. But he's not the problem. He is the symptom. He is the physical embodiment and the spiritual embodiment of everything that has always been rotten in this world. And what I don't want is for history to repeat itself and for the elites to co-opt this moment to benefit them, because that's what always happens. The elites always take people's resistance. They always take people's revolution. They always take uprisings and up-levelings in consciousness, and they wield and they manipulated the fuck out of all of those energies to benefit themselves. So what they're going to try to do, mark my words, what they're going to try to do is oust Trump, maybe even the entire Republican Party, and then replace all of those hyenas, all of those fucking vipers with corporate Democrats who push the same capitalist agenda that they've been pushing since the beginning of time. And what we really need to watch out for is that. That is the only thing that gives me pause, that gives me concern. I'm not worried about what Trump is doing. I'm not worried about what those cackling hyenas are doing, those feral fucking animals in the White House. I don't give a fuck about Marjorie Taylor Greene resigning. I do not care about all of the rats that are trying to jump ship. What I care about is the downfall of capitalism, which is intricately linked with the downfall of patriarchy and the downfall of religion, because they all have worked hand in hand for hundreds of years to keep us in chains. And I cannot stress enough how real and how serious this is. Capitalism doesn't work because it is an unnatural system. It is an unnatural system because it is the demon spawn of an unnatural parent. Patriarchy. Patriarchy should have never existed in the first place. Humans are not meant to live in rigid hierarchy. Women are not meant to be subjugated the way that we are, abused the way that we are, drained and just manipulated the way that we are. We have been victims of physical, emotional, spiritual, and psychological warfare for millennia. This is a deeply abominable, unnatural world that we live in, and Trump is just a symbol of that. After he leaves, our primary focus should be making sure that he and people like him with those dark triad fucking personalities never ever get to rise in the ranks of power and glory ever again. That should be our primary focus as a society, to stop this from happening again by dismantling the systems that made it possible in the first place. When something is natural, when something is aligned, when something is meant to be, it just flows. It's easy. That doesn't mean that there are no challenges to overcome. That doesn't mean that there are no problems that need solutions and creative thinking minds. But it does mean that when a system works, it works for everybody. It doesn't leave out 75% of the population while 1% of the population overindulges and 24% of the population deludes themselves into thinking that they're 1% of the population. We are living in a colonizer-made hell. And Trump would have never even been a probability, let alone a possibility, had it not been from the very beginning all about protecting and promoting business interests. This was not a country that was made for people. This is a country that was made for profit. And all of that is coming to a head now. And all of these different pillars of society have been working together to make sure that the vast majority of us never ever get what we deserve. And I want to demonstrate to you how many times throughout American history capitalism has failed. Capitalism is destined to fail because it was never supposed to work in the first place. It was only supposed to line the pockets of those at the very top, those who could be the most psychopathic, those who could be the most murderous, those who could care the least about human beings and about humanity. It is not a natural system. And until we dismantle this system, and the only way forward is socialism, by the way. The only way forward is what Zoran Mamdani is talking about. That is the only way. We either move forward with socialism or we crash and burn with capitalism right here. That is the only thing that's going on right now. But I want to demonstrate how many times capitalism has actually failed us so that you can start to see how this is something that has been deeply, deeply flawed and deeply, deeply broken since hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. People were fighting the same fights that we're fighting today. Except this time we're going to win, because this natural death of capitalism that has been prolonged and avoided and deferred, put off for decades, is finally now coming to its end, because we're all getting fucking sick of being bombarded left and right by advertisements and subscriptions and fees and all of this shit. It's all coming to an end naturally because it was always supposed to. And this is how capitalism always fails us. By the way, just to say it, to put what I'm about to say in context, strikes, revolts, revolutions, rebellions are all signs that something isn't working. In 1839, people in upstate New York started refusing to pay rent because they were being so mistreated and exploited by their landlords, to the point where they started committing acts of physical violence against any sheriff, sheriff's deputy, militia, or otherwise authority that showed up to collect the rent from them that they felt like they didn't owe because the landlord hadn't earned it. The anti-renter movement lasted for 30 years because even in the 19th century, rent was too damn high. Around the same time, also in the 1830s, people in Providence, Rhode Island started getting more and more angry about these extra restrictive voting laws that only allowed property-owning rich white men to vote. So they started Door's Rebellion, led by Thomas Door, where they convened as a body of people, drafted their own constitution, elected their own governor in Thomas Door, and basically just overrode everything that Providence, Rhode Island, or that Rhode Island in general was trying to do, and picked their own mayor. They were like, okay, well, the way that you're governing isn't correct, so we're basically going to do a coup. In 1829, an unnamed young shoemaker addressed a crowd of mechanics and working people in Philadelphia, and he said, "We find ourselves oppressed on every hand. We labor hard in producing all the comforts of life for the enjoyment of others, while we ourselves obtain but a scanty portion, and even that, in the present state of society, depends on the will of employers." Very similar to today. In 1829, Frances Wright of Scotland, who was an early feminist and utopian socialist, was invited by working men in Philadelphia to speak on the 4th of July. And she was speaking to one of the first citywide associations of labor unions in the United States. She asked if the American Revolution had been fought to, quote, "crush down the sons and daughters of your country's industry under neglect, poverty, vice, starvation, and disease." Basically, is this your freedom? Is this your king? Are you sure you're free? Also in 1829, a man named George Henry Evans, who was a printer and editor of the Working Man's Advocate, which was like a paper at the time, he wrote the Working Men's Declaration of Independence. And he basically just started listing off all of the ways that the Declaration of Independence actually didn't protect anybody and didn't advocate for anybody's freedom, including heavy levying of taxes, how private incorporation of businesses is really just like a battle of nepotism, like who you know depends on whether or not your business succeeds. Like he just started listing all of this stuff that was unfair for the working man. In 1834, a trade union in Boston started talking about all of the ways that the rights that should be afforded to everyone had been bastardized and reduced to privileges that only the wealthy and their children could take advantage of. In Baltimore, in the summer of 1835, the Bank of Maryland collapsed, and the people who were customers of the bank lost all of their savings, and so they started rioting and busting up and looting the houses of bankers. The courts started calling trade unions conspiracies to, conspiracies to restrain trade or sabotage trade, and then deemed trade unions illegal. You have to remember that these working people that were in these trade unions had no representation under the law because they weren't allowed to vote. So it's not like they could just go to the ballot box and vote for better worker protections or for better pay. The only recourse that they had was to riot. Pamphlets started appearing all over the cities talking about how the rich are against the poor and how the poor need to join arms and rise up together. They started disseminating secret newspapers amongst working class people to rise up in arms against the rich. 1929 was not the first Great Depression. There were many, many, many depressions leading up to 1929. 2008 was not the first Great Recession. There were many, many, many recessions leading up to 2008. And the reason that we don't learn more about this, unless you're maybe an economics major or like in finance, is because they don't want you to see how inefficient and unnatural capitalism is. If it worked, we wouldn't keep having these low lows and high highs, this chaotic system of crashes and booms, depressions and peaks. Something that works doesn't act like that. But because they're so addicted to capitalism, they want you to think that it's working. It's not. It never did. In the late 1830s, prices started rising, and working people who already couldn't buy food before damn sure couldn't buy food now. Flour that used to sell for $5.62 a barrel was now $12 a barrel. It's a big jump. In New York, members of the Equal Rights Party announced a meeting, and their rally cry was bread, meat, rent, and fuel. Their prices must come down. The people will meet in the park, rain or shine, at 4 o'clock p.m. on Monday afternoon. All friends of humanity determined to resist monopolies and extortioners are invited to attend. So they're at this meeting, and they're talking about how food prices and rent prices and everything is just too goddamn high. They whip themselves into a frenzy, and then they start speaking against Eli Hart, who was one of the foremost flour dealers of his day. They march to Eli Hart's house or warehouse and start just pulling all of these barrels of flour out, and just like stealing it, just giving it away for free. I shouldn't say steal it because these were heavily exploited people. If anything, the rich people were stealing from them. They were taking back what was theirs when they bust in and stole all this flour. That was the flour riots of 1837. Just to put into context what was going on, during the Depression or the recession of that year, 50,000 people, which was 1/3 of the working class, were without work in New York City alone. And 200,000 out of a population of 500,000 were living in utter and hopeless distress. They were starving to death, basically. And then Howard Zinn goes on to write, "There is no complete record of the meetings, riots, actions, organized and disorganized, violent and nonviolent, which took place in the mid-19th century as the country grew, as the cities became crowded, with working conditions bad, living conditions intolerable, with the economy in the hands of bankers, speculators, landlords, and merchants." In 1835, 50 different trades organized unions in Philadelphia, and there was a successful general strike of laborers, factory workers, bookbinders, jewelers, coal heavers, butchers, cabinet workers for the 10-hour workday. So Pennsylvania eventually won the 10-hour workday. They had to fight for a 10-hour workday before they could fight for an 8-hour workday. Weavers in Philadelphia in the early 1840s, who were mostly Irish immigrants, started striking for higher wages, and they would attack the homes of workers who were refusing to strike in order to stop them from working. But then religion got in the way because Irish Catholic weavers and native-born Protestant skilled workers started clashing over their beliefs. And then there were Protestant Catholic riots in Kensington, Pennsylvania in May of 1844. And so soon middle-class politicians started leading each group into a different political party, the Irish into the Democratic Party and the natives into the Republican Party. And now party politics and religion substituted for class issues. Once again, we are divided. This cemented the fragmentation of the Philadelphia working class and, quote, thereby created for historians the illusion of a society lacking in class conflict, when in reality, the class conflicts of 19th century America were as fierce as any known in the industrial world. And you have to understand, oftentimes, the anger over their lot in life, the anger that poverty creates, oftentimes expresses itself in, like, feudal violence based on racism or religion or nativism or nationalism. But it all is rooted in poverty, capitalism. And the Irish were in really, really, really bad shape in the 19th century, and probably a big part of the 20th century too. These ships that were coming from Ireland were filled with basically wartime migrants fleeing starvation because Ireland was suffering from a potato famine caused by Great Britain. So by the time the ships from Ireland got over here, thousands of people were dying on these ships. They were just pulling dead bodies off the ships. Like when I said in an earlier video that these immigrant ships were not much better than slave ships, and the main difference is that they weren't shackled to the fucking deck, I meant that. In New York in 1949, a large mob of mostly Irish people stormed the Astor Place Opera House and started shouting, "Burn the damn den of aristocracy," and just like started a riot, and the militia was called out, and 200 people were killed or wounded. By the 1860s, New York City was in an all-out revolution. The mill girls were going on strike, the shoemakers were going on strike, the weavers were going on strike, the printers were going on strike, carpenters, machinists, mechanics, sugar packers, glass cutters, everybody going on fucking strike. The whole country was going on strike, and yet we never learned about any of this in school. In 1877, there were railroad strikes that got so live, they started making news in Europe. And this is before, like, communication domestically, let alone internationally, was an easy thing. By the time those railroad strikes were over 100 people were dead, 1,000 people had gone to jail, and 100,000 workers had gone on strike. Crazy. There are so many different stories in this chapter. I'm not going to go through them all because we just don't have that type of time. Read the book for yourself. But the point that I want to make, and I'm going to end it here, the point that I want to make is that if capitalism was a system that worked, if capitalism were a system that was natural, would it continually cause this much uproar? Would it continually crash and burn and fail so spectacularly in every single generation of American history? Something that is aligned with the greater good, something that is naturally occurring, doesn't move like this. It doesn't get by and fits and starts and starve half of the population so that 5%, 3%, 1% of the population can overindulge themselves in shit that they don't need. The system that we live under is an abomination, and it has wrecked the lives of literally countless people over the centuries, and I could not be more thrilled to be alive at the moment where we are witnessing the death of capitalism.